Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me with this? Testing, testing, okay. Okay, people at the door, there's seats over here and in the whole front row here. Okay, so welcome everyone to our event tonight. Welcome to our in-person and live stream attendees to the Toronto Metropolitan University Department of Architectural Science lecture series. I'm Assistant Professor Terry Peters, host for the evening and co-chair of the Departmental Lecture Committee, along with Professor Will Galloway. So we've divided the speaking roles for this event into 3 parts. I will begin with a few comments, and then Will let us know about the schedule for this evening. Carly, one of our student committee members, will introduce tonight's speakers. And our speakers tonight, as you know, are Behnaz Assadi and Nima Javidi.
Correct.
Sorry. This lecture is the second in our winter lecture series this term, sponsored by the Ontario Association of Architects and the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. So thank you to both. To put this evening's discussion into context, the lecture series is designed as a learning opportunity for our students to collect with the larger architectural community. It allows us to extend what we're doing in studio and in our lecture courses within this building out into the context of the professional architectural community. And it gives us a chance to explore topics that are relevant and introduce speakers into our community. This term, our lecture committee of students and faculty invited speakers who were practicing in unique ways, and as a result are producing thought-provoking creative work. We are lucky to be able to hear from all of them, especially this evening's guests. So before I pass the microphone on to Will, I will share our land acknowledgement. So Toronto Metropolitan University sits on lands now known as Toronto, but which have been inhabited for millennia by many Indigenous nations and communities. It is our tradition to begin our meetings with a land acknowledgement, which recognizes the enduring presence and resilience of Indigenous peoples on this land, in our area, and as a reminder, we are still accountable to these relationships. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share this territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. It is in this spirit and on behalf of the university and our department that I welcome you all to this event. Thank you. Will?
Hello, I'm Will Galloway, co-chair along with Terry of this year's lecture series. I'm not going to say very much. I just want to make 2 requests, and they relate to the schedule, basically. So the lecture is about 1 hour, I believe. Yes. And then we have about 20 or 30 minutes for questions and answers. So the request is, if you have a question during the lecture, please make note of it. And after the lecture is finished, we'll have a question and answer period. And so you have ample time, so you don't need to raise your hand during the speech. And then related to that also is another request, and it's very simple. Please stick around to the end of the question and answers, which means basically after the lecture is done, just to avoid disruption, and also because we want to hear your questions and the answers are going to be brilliant, you should please stick around. Okay, so that's really all I have to say, those 2 requests. Very easy, and the introduction is going to be by Carly.
Hello, everyone. JA Architecture Studio is a Toronto-based practice led by Iranian and Canadian architect Nima Javidi and the landscape designer Behnaz Assadi. The office combines the rootedness of a local architecture firm with the broadness interest of an international design studio. From small to medium-sized buildings that confronts detail-level building constraints to ambiguous international competitions, the studio works tries to find meaningful tangencies between iconography, geometrical and formal properties of architecture of different backgrounds, and invest in inventing new architectural hybrids as responses to the diverse realities of 21st century cities. Nima Javidi is a registered architect in Toronto and the 2021 Gwathaway Professor of Design at the Cooper Union Erwin S. Channon School of Architecture, where he teaches and coordinates core design studios. And Nima's interest in design is in the intersection of geometry, structure, and typology in architecture. Behnaz Assadi is a landscape designer and a founding partner at Architecture Studio. And she is currently an assistant professor at John H. Daniel Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design at the University of Toronto. And thank you, Nima and Behnaz. We look forward to learning from your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was a very lovely presentation. Thank you, Terry and Will, for inviting us. We're very happy to be here. We have, once we presented in this room, so we have a good memory of this room, and thanks so much. So it's always a challenge when you want to present your work through a series of slides, and the question is where to start and how can you project, how you can basically talk about your work through a linearity of slides. And we thought we're going to start exactly from 3/4 in of the start of our practice, starting from 2010 or 2009. And we're going to, so 3/4 in from that time to now would be 2019, right after pandemic, right before the pandemic. We're going to talk about it. We're going to start our projects with an exhibition that we did at the Cooper Union. And we generally think we have a series of areas of interest that architecturally we are involved with, but we also like about to talk about the mode of practice, the ways in which we try to get our areas of interest outside into the outside world. And so it's always a combination of how to, both to talk about architecture and modes of practice. So the exhibition was called 1-to-1. And essentially for that exhibition, we unfolded the walls of our office and placed them along the walls of the corridor of the third floor gallery of the Cooper Union, creating a 1-to-1 overlay of the photographs of one space onto the walls of the other. And as you can see in this diagram, we unrolled the walls and we placed it exactly on the walls of the gallery. One space in Toronto and the other at the Cooper Union's Foundation building in New York with its rich history. And after placing the images onto the space, we also took a few critical objects that we thought we had designed and we thought they were important, like the sawhorse and that concrete base, and even the working drawing set that we really liked. And we placed them back onto, we took the object to New York and we placed it back onto the images of our office into the, in that new space, almost as a register of the scale and one-to-oneness. And transposing the surfaces of one space over the other happened along the walls of the exhibition. And in the best moments, there were conflations of not just the design objects and their images, but the adjacencies of everyday objects, like the fire alarm of one space next to the thermostats of the other. And we brought the data, which brought the day-to-day rituals of one architecture school and that of an architecture practice into a one-to-one relationship. And that's the core of our interest. The things that we teach and learn and ways of navigating them into almost another space or the world, if you will. And of course, windows and views and depth added an interesting visual dimension to the exhibition. And as you can see, hopefully you would see in this video, I think, yes. Yes, it's a casual pan shot of exhibition, shows you how you can see multiple depths and multiple conflating reciprocities between an object and its image, the light of one space versus the light, the light in the photograph, the depth of one picture and the depth of the room. And as the door opens and even the doorknob of one room with the doorknob of our space in Toronto. So, and even the spaces look as black as white as our photographs. And I'm sorry, I'm repeating this. And we also had a series of manifestos as part of the exhibition. And basically those, it was a kind of test that, explained both the interest and some of the critical thinking behind our practice.
So yeah, the manifestos all started with the prompt 1-to-1. And I think this one in particular, I quite like. It's there is a 1-to-1 relationship, a relationship between the place of our practice and the location of our projects. We mostly build in the same neighborhood that we live and we choose to live and work. We like it for the same reason we like to participate in its regeneration. We learn from its subtleties, its multiple histories, neither of which are so dominant to be forced to follow or too benign to ignore. They are the experience of North American city at its best. 1-to-1 is the physical register of immigration, of being slightly off to the context that you aspire to fit within, struggle with, and eventually change by the virtue of having lived there. And we think perhaps our office is the true testament of this statement. So here is the office. It's basically the exterior shell of the exhibition that Nima was just talking about. So those walls are within this. Used to be a storefront corner lot in Beaconsfield Village here in Toronto. And at the very back of the office, it's a half addition that we're working on. The gross floor area allowed by zoning wasn't enough for a living space, but it was just enough to work as an addition at a distance to the main building, where rituals and objects of our life and work kind of dispersed through the courtyard between the two, from one building to another. There were two, as you can see here, there are two connections, one above and one below grade, and part of one building is connected to part of the other. That's why we called it 1.5. And this was exactly the time that COVID hit. So in ways, it was also a way of thinking and dealing with the spatial realities of COVID, that blurred boundary of work and life, that condition that we as architects are very, very familiar with, the fuzziness between life and work. So that's the project as it stands at the end of our lot, with the laneway separating it from the building next to it, the half sunken basement, and a circular window that brings light to that space below. This picture is looking in to the window to our model shop in the back. I'm making a 1-to-10 model of the project inside of it. So basically, I am in the space that the project will occupy later on, building a 1-to-10 model of the same project. This is the other side of the main building of our office. The building is a very simple gable 2-story light wood frame building with cladded with a very ugly brick veneer, which we immediately painted it white as we acquired the building. And we just added that small bottom window, which is basically a short door to create a visual connection through the set of windows within the project. And the idea of the project was a parallel, not just between the two buildings, but between two modes of construction. So one is almost a textbook light wood frame construction with sits flush at grade, linear wood members, studs, joists, rafters, and the other one dimension lumber, consolidated as tectonic plates that are stacked in different angles and configurations, which is more, I think, visible in the plan, where rotation of series of structural plates within an orthogonal logic of a shell basically creates the project. Here is the 1-to-10 model. This was shot in the same space that it was built, which is incidentally the site of the project. The foundation is just out of formwork, as you can see. And that concrete edge or ledge, if you will, goes through the courtyard and registers the main floor of the building. And it also becomes the seam where the concrete and wood hybrid meet along it. And now I'm going to take you through a series of photos of assembly of the model and its relationship to human body. So that's the concrete foundation, the window to the basement space, and that ledge that we talked about, the placement of the stair, the side CLT walls of the main level that is placed on the same edge that I talked about. And then the interlocked oblique structure of the second floor plates, as well as the roof beams, all as one component, locks in with the CLT walls. And then a roof light wood frame cage shrink wraps the CLT structure. And we always close this on this image. We like it very much because it's like an exquisite corpse where one of the authors becomes part of the game. A concrete base, a CLT mid-body, and my head.
So we're gonna, from the scale of that unit, which is a house, we're gonna get to the scale of the neighborhood. And much of our recent works are built in one neighborhood, as Behnaz explained, you know, West Queen West in Toronto, and you can read them as different responses to a single prompt. Most of them are located on lots between 20 feet to 25 feet of frontage and 50 foot of building depth. And this tight constraint has forced us to operate on the space between the efficiency of a familiar type and the unique urban conditions offered by the site to reinvent the type. This tension between the architecture and the city, the inside and outside, and the private and the public is typically mediated through the type, number, location, and configuration of the stairs in each project, and sometimes entries. And it's highlighted in this diagram. Sometimes you can look at, sometimes you present your work through, you know, single projects, and after a while presenting them and looking at them, you realize they were all part of one mode of thinking in architecture, and maybe they're all responses to one single theme. So I'm going to go through them quickly. So this one is called Octagon. It's an octagonal ADU, an accessory dwelling unit at the end of a property on the same street that we showed. And it uses, essentially, it's an octagon placed at the rear of the property, and it has an elongated tail that comes all the way and finds the address on the front. This, you know, it's a project where the architectural promenade becomes the architecture itself by having a line that all of the functions are, you know, the house is the path, and it wraps through the octagonal shell, and it goes up to the top floor, and a series of rituals of daily life happens along it. And one of them is the kitchen that can potentially operate as a community kitchen, serving the laneway right next door. This is right behind Drake Hotel. And you can see, and this won the Canadian Architecture Award in 2018. This project is called 111, and it's the staggered nature of 3 units, and using an existing gap between a storefront building and its neighbor, we use it as a kind of a cut-through mid-block from the front to the back of the block. And it's essentially, even the tenant at the basement, at the main level, stopped using the front door and like the idea of taking and using that gap as a breezeway gallery to take people to the back of the bar. But again, we basically stagger 3 very small units, and the idea of, and as you can see them, they're barely visible from the street, but they're accessed from that passage that is very dark that you can't see, but from the front to the back. And the idea of the units they were all a simple stack of 3 rituals of life, and just living, sleeping, and a moment of capturing the south exposure. And this won the Canadian Architect Award in 2015. And here the whole project starts with the, we notice again, there is a standard lot on Markham Avenue, and we realize there is this very narrow laneway or mews, public thoroughfare on the north side of the property. And we use that to turn the, a small house to a very small housing project. And we try to use the potential of a scissor stair that is, I should use this. Yes. So this is a scissor stair right in the middle. So basically, we, instead of using anything on the front, we brought people from the side, and we use that kind of the condition of double entry for the scissor stair to create to basically pack 6 units that each of them would have both frontages on front and back, both for ventilation and light. And this is the volume of 1 unit. As you can see, it's quite, we really use the integration of the configuration of stair as part of the space. And we didn't put anything on the front. We just chamfered a pure barrel vault to register the existence of that mews to take people to the center of the lot. That project also won PA Award and also a Canadian Architect Award. This project hasn't won anything, but it's a good project. This was a corner lot that there was an existing building. We proposed turning it to a 3-story, 3-unit building by creating a series of corbelling additions to the back, each of them with individual units, and also using the potential of a corner lot and acknowledging the fact that you have a very important frontage on this side. There is a history of these kind of uses in Toronto, and I think Bridget Shim once told me that Toronto has many great things about its urbanity, but we don't know how to turn the corner, how to turn the corner. And I think this is a way of addressing how you can create, because the corner lots are generally exposed on the backyard towards this, towards the adjacent street. And this is a way of creating a kind of, corbelling conditions to the back, but also creating an edge for the whole block. And the interesting thing is, as you corbel and things become thinner, that unit is not usable on the main level because it's too thin, and we turn it, as you can see. So this is when we used slate shingle to take the mansard roof and bring it all the way down, and it takes you two doors, and this is the 3rd door. But that the very thin is just really a light scoop that captures light and brings and the main part of the usable space is in the basement, as you can see here. So it's essentially, that's the thinness, and that's how light goes in to the area that is usable in the basement. And it goes back and claims the territory that we lost through that staggering. And here the program was as a commercial test kitchen for a chef that lives on the main house, and it was a triangular site. And we thought that how can we use the idea of a side addition, but with the line of tangency as opposed to this kind of thing. We thought, okay, what if the addition only meets the original building on one point? And through through inflating the simple lines and becoming, once they become walls, you find the moments of threshold and the kind of relationship between a bridging on the slightly above the grade and a below grade access that would take you to the sunken backyard. And essentially, it's this, how you can, in almost like one single gesture in plan and section, you can take light. This was the part that we thought it can be part of the living space, but at the same time can be almost like a garden. This is where the kitchen would be, and this is that passage. And this is an extension of a living space that can serve the test kitchen, but also can be part of the living room. And this is those two passages on top of each other at the moments of tangency. So geometry and typology are two themes that we generally tend to work with, and this is the expression of the building on the street, just how it captures light and how the tangency, and all of that is kind of suppressed in the strong presence of how we cladded everything in brick. But you can see that passage there, and this is the sunken yard, backyard that is slightly low, and again you can see how light goes along that stair up. This project won Canadian Architect Award of Excellence in 2020, and also was on the cover, and it also won the 68 PA Award. So this set of, I'm going to show you another set of projects that is more about tectonic and how things are built. So this set of projects struggles with the ways in which the known formal repertoire of lightwood framing, like gables, dormers, and roof geometry, can start to crossbreed with figures and icons non-native to it. This crossbreed tries to stay away from the explicit dualities of icon, facade, and space plan, much like this corner shot of Short Hill Casino by McKee White, which we really like, where the mismatch between the expression of a perfect equilateral gable on the elevation and the half-round area in plan is expressed and negotiated through delamination through delamination of that moment. That mismatch between the elevation and plan we really like, and how tectonically it's being expressed. And so the relationship between the figure of the edge and the geometry of the space is quite important to us. We call them spaces with deep profiles. And in some projects, they're pure non-structural surfaces nested within shed structures. And in others, the edge frame becomes the structure. Or in some cases, the relationship goes even further and becomes the formal expression of the exterior, as the interior organization is triggered by the configuration of the stair. Essentially, outline edge, the organization of the plan, and the configuration of the stair, they all start to kind of establish a reciprocal relationship, and they start to inform each other. And as you can see in this plan, the geometry of the stair creates a complex relationship with the exterior shell, and the profile of the arch bay window that you will see becomes a vaulted ceiling that extends the full length of the third floor and connects to the back. And essentially, this is the relationship that happens between the configuration of the stair and suddenly how you take a dormer and turn it to a full barrel vault to the back, and how these kind of relationships start to impact each other. This is the diagram. And there's also ADO, and we notice as we are building these buildings, the notion of a rear yard is now acting as a courtyard, and we are really interested in that. And some of the uses of the main house, we are now putting it there. So the ground acts as a courtyard, and we don't have the kind of the duality that we used to have in Toronto typology. And from study model to detailed plans to one-to-one mock-ups, formal relationships established at the outset only truly begin to reveal themselves at key moments in construction. We build one-to-one models, mock-ups right in front of in our office. Sometimes it scares the neighbor, but we always try to, keep them in the way that doesn't bother the neighborhood. And working with the common formal vocabulary, the relationship between the main building and the ancillary building in the back, starts to share some of the languages, and there's a reciprocity even in the form, as you can see, and also established in the key lines of the geometry. These are some of the finished images of the space by Felix Machot, which we really like, and that's that dormer, that's the edge of that stair that meets the edge of the dormer. And you can see in certain moments how some of these decisions in plan and section merge and create tight relationships between space and the movements of the human body. The stairwell and the crease on the ensuite left wall is where the oblique wall in plan meets the extension of the dormer in front. So there is a crease line that we love to fade it as it becomes tangent to the top of the barrel vault. And in this context, this is a tight array of buildings that try to maximize the density on an urban edge. These are generally difficult construction that we really like, the tightness of which you can't even tell which one is a party wall and which one is shared, and to create a kind of a clean infill is very difficult, and we take joy in that difficulty. And there's not a single stylistic language that dominates in this neighborhood. You can recognize forms and tropes, and that you can follow some, and you can also break the rhythm. And there was a beautiful flatness to the semi that we, that used to be the original building that we rent. We did this a new infill, and we really like that flatness, and we try to kind of extend that back to the new condition that we create, and sometimes it backfires. As you can see, our next door neighbor demolished that, and some of our moves are now back there, and that careful. It's not a precious context, and that's what we like about it. Sometimes you want to be, precious about the neighbor that is flat and nice, and then boom, your move. And And sometimes we follow the geometry of the mansard roofs of a series of row houses, but we use the exact same angle, but we blended it we kind of transformed it as a wall, and we clad the whole thing in some kind of aged copper and put a basically double, two-story bay window. And the idea, even mansard roofs are roofs, but technically they create the space behind them. And we like the idea of taking the mansard roof and acknowledging that the fact it's a slanted wall. And all of it is always to create within the kind of compact or short, the low-rise density of these neighborhoods to try to maximize the number of units. And this is a sunken yard on the front and how we can get the access. And this is the same line rotated to create a kind of a moment of privacy for the space. And this is another project where we basically took a bungalow and we added that two-story addition on top. It was a very narrow lot. It was a very shallow lot. It was quite wide, by Toronto standards, obviously, but it wasn't deep enough. And we tried to incorporate two outdoor spaces into the shell of the building, using a pentagonal stair that you can see some of its angles, and that's essentially a diagram of what we added. Those are the nested spaces along the pentagonal stair. Or, this photo is always very important to us. This is the shell of the old Penn Station in New York. And it also shows, it explicitly shows that some of the spaces, the shell of the spaces that we are so familiar with are not, quite a lot of times they're not structural. And we like the idea of the duality that both the formal expression, but also the structural duality. And this takes us to this project, which the shell is completely non-structural. And it's, we essentially inserted a vault into the space of the bakery that used to be a repair garage to define the area between the retail on the front and the operating kitchen in the back. And the large custom design and fabricated steel windows taking advantage of basically the original garage doors. And we just, we created these custom elements and we put them in. And the best thing about this project that we like is there is a kind of oneness in the tectonic of the millwork and the furnishing elements, and also the tectonic of the space. So it says all, steel plates that are hot rolled steel plates that are bent and infilled with maple, both countertops, tables, and also the shell. Or underscore projects, the new building that tries to blur the boundaries between new and existing, with an art gallery and speakeasy on the ground floor, artist residency, and a project space on the second, and also a co-working art studio on the third level. The inverted bay window basically takes some of the formal repertoire that we have, and also basically tries to fit in the context, but at the same time try to slightly bring a degree of attention. But the key part of the project is its relationship to Dundas Street. So as you can see, the subdivision of the lot is completely oblique to the orientation of the street. And it's a very narrow and very deep lot. And this is almost one of the two interventions on the front. We rotated it and put it as a skylight that registers the kind of perpendicular orientation of the grid of the city, as opposed to the walls that you occupy the space. And as you can see, the orientation of the nested element is completely oblique to the roof rafters. And this is the space. You can see you are in one space, but at the same time it registers through that light scoop, it registers the orientation of the city at the same time, and some of the drawings. And so we like the conventional method. So as part of working with this conventional method of construction in America, we became more and more curious in the history and its unexplored potentials. And from that, boring lightness was born. This is essentially our twice proposal for the Canadian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. Finalist proposals, yes. We were finalists both times, and we never won. But we think it's an important project because It's an exploration of historical and contemporary alignments of light with frame construction to broader national issues, such as ecology, regionalism, colonization, and settlement. Our proposal was rather simple: to ask architects across Canada to bore. Bore is a kind of rotary act of extracting a sample out of a mass, and we call it boring lightness, both as kind of double entendre on boringness of light wood frame construction, but the act of taking a cylindrical sample out. We asked the architects to take one bore out of their favorite houses in their regions and their provinces, and part of it is extension of the body of work that Vincent Scully brought both the historic attention to light wood frame construction, but also this ability to enjoy it architecturally, bring it into our realm of aesthetics, and that's where things become powerful. And Venturi was a practitioner who stripped it down from its stylistic tendencies. And while they lightly escaped from some of the Puritan and while it kind of stripped it from some of previous stylistic tendencies, but he was smart enough not to also fall into the ethos of Puritan ethos of modernism. And even the way Leap House sits on the ground, and you can see almost the piers that touch the beach are expressed there. There is these kind of dualities of how skirting doesn't go all the way, and you express a planar condition, but at the same time you express how different the mode of construction is and how light it is, and perhaps that's why they can transport it to another location. And we really like the idea of the physical lightness of this mode of construction. And it's one of the unique experiences being in North America, is walking in a space that is slightly moves, just because it's so light and it's always in the kind of a moment of balance. And essentially our piece was this. We took, this is a 1/4 inch scale of our model that we proposed for Venice. And yes.
And the jury actually really liked this piece. Okay. Oops. Okay. So one of our favorite prompts of the exhibition, which perhaps in ways stood the test of time, is this one. One-to-one reinforces scalelessness of geometry. Different scales of drawings and models of our work are present as objects unto themselves. Their diversity reinforces the presence of geometry as the main theme of our practice. Geometric relationships goes beyond the regulating logic across different scales of one project and becomes the generative engine creating cross-links, contaminations across different projects of very different contexts. Objects of our work tend to sit well next to each other. They are strangers unaware of their genealogical links. And for that, we thought we show you two of these unaware strangers, partly to talk about the relevance of geometry in our work, and partly to bring up the importance of architecture competition that unfortunately we see less and less of in North America for public buildings. So here is our proposal for Behnaz Museum in Dessau. It was a 2-stage international competition where we won the 4th prize. This is the building as it sits on the site. The museum was supposed to be designed for the 100-year anniversary of Behnaz, and it was supposed to exhibit the work of the school. We always work in iterations. So this is a table of all the iterations of the models that we made for the project. The competition required flexible curatorial exhibition space and interesting volumes. So we did both iterations of the curation of the space and also the massing and the structure. So we created 2 stratas. One was the main floor, and that was about the city, the park. And the second one was the permanent exhibition, where a reciprocal structure of a pitched roof created different exhibition areas underneath the define basically territories underneath it. And you can see here, very similar to the projects that Nima was talking about, similar interest at different scale, interest in the tension that is caused by packing or orthographic geometry within a polygonal shell, exercised here again. And I think that in ways, this was Gropius's challenge to contain the centrifugal diversity that he intended under one shell that was the school. So the second project is our proposal for Kaunas Concert Hall in Lithuania, in which a pure octagon on the outside registers the existence of two concert halls within by varying gently the roof towards that raises towards two corners. The site was very, very exciting because it was next to a river, and as you can see in this image, it's mostly flooded. The river fluctuated a lot, so the site plan was a challenge. Was to create an outdoor public realm that would maintain functional during different levels of flooding. And this is the leftover space, the interstitial space between the two concert halls, created the most important processional space between the two, which belonged to the city, right where the river splits into halves. And that's that processional space. So now a little about landscape. So the history of landscape is the history of contradictory forces: nature versus human, native versus non-native, spontaneity versus control, interconnected systems versus forces of fragmentation. And in all of these dualities, if you will, there exists a threshold that belongs to neither of them, but is affected by both. And that is precisely where our office's interest in ecology and landscape lies. That space where unpredictability of ecological processes meets the abstraction of urbanity, where our understanding of third landscapes meets the poetics of terrain vague. So the these thresholds happen at different scales, and we're interested in all of them. This is, for example, a large scale. This was a competition at Lima, Peru, where the ecological membranes, this ecological membranes kind of contains an archaeological site, which is this one, which was something that we shouldn't touch within, and separates it from the historic context that is on the outskirts of it. There was a water table underneath this very arid site, which kind of was interesting. It was almost as if these thresholds that we're interested in also functions at a section. And then this membranes basically linked pockets of ecological systems, climate, water, and flora, fauna together. And what we designed was basically ended up being a series of architectural interventions along that ecological promenade, and then a series of wind towers, which are these ones, registers the location of these wells, which were connected to a qanat system, or they called it tios. In Iran, we call it qanat, which is basically a way of tapping into the water table to bring water up, and we used it to irrigate this very arid site. So from there to a small scale, so these are small leftover patches of green in urban context, that leftover land protected by city bylaw and encroached by forces of development. Our office side yard is one such space. These yards are interconnected yet fragmented networks of ecological system, where a change to the ecological makeup of one can potentially change that of an entire neighborhood, which is something we are actually testing here. So that white line that you see in the photo, that line is basically a grid system that we laid across our yard to isolate standard units of the area, to study numbers, types, patterns of distribution of plants across this site. And it's actually a very old technique from 19th century. F. Clement, I think, who's an ecologist, created this technique called quadrant. We basically created 300 of these squares, which is laid on our site yard, and we're systematically documenting the change over time, hopefully over a longer course. It's been now 2 years, and I should remind you that actually I can mention that all the ecology that you see here is what we call spontaneous, what our neighbors call weed. So our neighbors are not very happy about our little experiment here. And our side yard, incidentally, becomes the threshold where our one-to-one model explorations, our mock-ups, and our landscape interest gradually makes its way to our projects. So here is, for example, 44 Foxley that Nima was talking about. This is the landscape for that very small urban yard. The threshold of permeability and impermeability, biotics and abiotics, and a moment of spontaneity. That was the first sprout of spontaneous plant that grew out of this blurred boundary, which made us very excited. Large scale again, the third landscape that lies along a railroad network. You all know it, Metrolinx in Toronto. It was a recent competition, which we lost. But the project, Metrolinx extension is gonna, or those of, I'm sure you all know, but for those of you who are not from Toronto, it's gonna connect exhibition space, like very southeast corner of Toronto to very northwest corner, which is I think Science Center. This map is basically the ecological footprint of that corridor. And our proposal was to use the same system that we were exploring to negotiate that threshold, a porous system that would define the blurred boundary and also soften the presence of sound barriers all along this corridor, which actually passed through a lot of residential neighborhoods. It actually passes right next to Wardell that Nima was talking about. We think it's not a coincidence that our fascination with landscapes, third landscapes, coincides with that of good storytellers of cities like Wim Wenders, for example. Where he puts Dame Platz as the backdrop for his fallen angels in The Wings of Desire. And I don't know if you've seen that movie. If you haven't, watch it. We watched it again. It's fantastic. He also takes these vague thresholds, these no-man lands underneath massive infrastructures. So, and every city has these. Which brings us basically to our most recent and final project that we're gonna show you today. It's called the Light Grain. And it recently actually won an award that it will be announced in March. A site that is located along Don River. So the good thing is we're in Toronto, you all know Don River. But for those of you who are not, we have two major ravine systems, Don and Humber. Both of them are ecologically significant. Both of them are encroached by forces of development. They've been straightened and channelized by the forces of infrastructure that passes by these systems. And in this particular case, that's the Don, which is straightened, and that's the DVP, which you probably all know. And that is the site right next to the Don. So that's the site. So once again, linear interstitial space along a major infrastructural corridor in the city, left over from once interconnected ecological ecology of the ravine, and our project's careful reuse of an existing residual ecology that suggests that the potential to reframe our understanding of these leftover terrains without radically altering the nature of them. So the project is a horizontal band, creates a visual connection between two existing factory buildings, leveraging that underutilized a third landscape, if you will, or gap, to create a sense of entry. So utilizing that threshold, and that threshold, which is shown here, is neither interior nor exterior. It's neither insulated completely nor it's completely open. It's neither pure landscape nor pure architecture. It's just the third landscape. It's resilient and it's disturbed. So here, the generosity of the third landscape allows the accessibility not to become a requirement to satisfy, but the main expression of the project. Inside and over the entry, there is it's covered by an open air structure, and on the inside, on top of the main dining hall, it's covered. The sawtooth roof is covered and punctured by large south-facing oculars skylights, which is not visible here, but you see the expression of the light coming from them on the roof, which basically this light would animate the room below. Mediating between the logic of the roof overhead and the sweeping cut of the ramp below, a single point of a column marks the point of convergence in the project. This column at the center of the figurative ramp supports sistered steel beams, allowing the roof's long span and relentless structuring logic to generate an honest, workable tectonic. And here are some of our roof iterations. And although as you can see, the roof spans across the whole building, but only half of it is covered. One half of it is left open to allow these the spontaneity of these growth to keep on developing over time, and the other half that is on top of the diner and the dining hall is actually covered. On the interior, there is minimal intervention, allowing the residual histories of the building to remain legible while also supporting the new functions that are required. In this way, I think the building feels not like a finished project, but rather a work in progress, which in my mind is the closest architecture can come to landscape. And here are some of our favorite moments of the project. An easement on the side of the building, which was used for light service, now becomes the ground for this lush, spontaneous urban ecology. Or in the middle, the familiar North American typology of a long diner. It acts as a performative space for production. And lastly, the kitchen on the top level extends over the dining hall and creates and cantilevered basically over the dining hall and creates a reciprocal and immediate relationship between the rituals of baking and the rituals of eating. And while each one of the elements, like the chimney, the roof, the beam, the column, and the ramp, has distinct logic tied to both its figure and function, they also contribute to the assembly as a whole that ties the two existing buildings together. And in the end, and viewed through a larger lens, the historic location of the two, its relationship to major infrastructural corridors and the ravine, has the potential to reframe our understanding of the site and how ecology is formed in interstitial spaces. In ways, through imagining its potential, it suggests becoming part of a string of similar projects that, without radically altering the nature of these terrain vagues, brings them into our consciousness and enjoyment through mindful uses. And in closing, we would like to think that this project in ways highlights what will become more evident in our projects to come, a sense of reciprocity that comes from dealing with the charged thresholds where tectonically raw architecture meets spontaneity of ecology in these terrain vagues. Thank you.
So, questions? Please feel free to raise your hands.
I also forgot to mention only one. We were also lucky to have two other photographers for our project. Riley Snelling did most of the photography of our office that we basically used to, because it wasn't easy. We don't have a big space, so to take those photographs in such a flat way, he was amazing. And also Sam Javanru. So most of the photographs that we showed of our built work or the built spaces were their contributions to our work.
And of course, we have our interns to thank too. For
yes, everything that we showed you is the result of the teamwork of great, we call them job people that we work together with, and all of the work that we saw was their work.
So I'll give this to you. Feel free to raise that you don't like actually. Microphone.
Hello. I just wanted to ask that it's really evident that model making is a really large part of your firm or your studio's, probably not only just the way that you present your ideas, but maybe even the process. Can you just speak a little bit about that? I'll honestly, throughout these few lecture series that we had, we haven't seen a lot of maybe they do exist, but they haven't shown a lot of model makings. It's very, I believe, a unique and an expressive way that your firm stands out.
Yes, we tend to make a lot of models, and most of them we do it for our own pure joy. We love to think through models. But the beauty of living in North America is the fact that actually the actual building is not very different from its model. It's just scaling it up would make it the actual building. So
especially houses and
in houses particularly. But apart from that, at larger scale as well, I think no rendering could come close to the shot that you take from a physical model that has been populated with objects and rituals that will take house it basically.
and we go back and forth. It's not one motivating the other. We are also, I think, as you saw, we're good with computers as well. But we do back and there's always a leap from one to the other, from one medium to the other, from one mode of representation to the other, and they cannot substitute each other. And we also know that we started winning competition once we start making models. So I don't know, we can't quite explain, but sometimes the way you are working with models and you see the space, you change things that is completely, although it's three-dimensional, and when you're very good with a three-dimensional software, you feel that you are doing the same, but they're not the same. And yeah.
Do you keep all your models?
Yes, that's the joy of. And our office is now is in compression of these. It's a smaller space that we are now feeling the weight of our models, and that's the thing that is remaining from these projects, and we really like it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for your great lecture. Through your lecture, I picked up on the fact that you usually come to the project or the form of the project through the idea that stands behind it. How, what do you think about if that action was flipped and coming up with the form of the project actually defined the idea of what the project would do?
Sorry, can you explain the flipped version?
So,
the form comes from the project as opposed to comes before the project.
No, like for Corbel.
Yes.
The idea of putting an end to a block formed how the Corbel would work, or for one of the ancillary buildings, the linear form of it formed what the house would do.
Yes.
Now, what would it be like to flip that, to come up with the form, and then later define the idea behind it?
Because we are doing that. We are coming up with, we start with the form, because that's not something most people argue. They always say, this is the brief, this was the project, and we realized the best way to accommodate the program was through this form. And we realized we have to accommodate the program. We have to respond. We have to, come up with a way to respond to the prompt. But there's also something that architecture has, which is the discipline of architecture, things that is autonomous from the realities of the project. For example, doing a side addition that the mass or the added space has a tangential relationship to the wall on the side doesn't come from the brief, comes from your formal intuition before the brief. It's like at the moment of starting that project, we know we have to accommodate a certain program, where we also have that geometric desire before before any of those. It's almost autonomous from it.
And I think even one instance of in Behnaz.
Yes. Yes.
It was not about. We were working on something else. And Behnaz itself, in one of those on the table, one of the models was a client's house that he hated. We loved it. We kept it. And on Behnaz, we were just thinking about something different. And then we just grabbed that model and placed it on the site. And we said, well, this works.
Actually, it's more complicated. Going back to that question of model, we were working in Rhino. It was a beautiful form, but and Behnaz passed by, and I was working with a colleague of mine, and somehow we thought, okay, the forms and the program and also the lines of the site generated that form that it's almost like a boomerang figure, if you imagine. And then Behnaz was passing by and said, yeah, I don't think so. And And then she just looked at that and said, I think this, and then boom. And there was something about the scale of the model was, small, you know, the site, we started the site model, and she picked that, the house, you know, the cross-reference and the scale. The moment she placed it, we thought, yeah, it makes sense. So having models around is a different kind of, is another value to models, because sometimes you forget about everything that you've done. You just place one model and you know what, this works better.
Thank you. So I got it the wrong
You
way
got
around.
it.
That's not enough structures. Are you trying to post-rationalize something?
I do that sometimes.
No, but I think if you think about it, the autonomy is about our discipline. If you think about the area, you know, any period that you go to architecture school, like right now, you would see a formal repertoire that, you know, is across the school. And 10 years, you come back and every program, it's the same program, but you see, you know, completely different forms appear on all of the projects. So we're always operating. It doesn't mean that people are post-rationalizing. There's a presence and persistence to formal repertoire that you almost get immersed in it, and you have to be very good at it to be able to escape out of or create new language within that, you know, new vocabulary within that repertoire.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, I
Hello.
had a question about sort of your relationship to your practice. And I noticed that across a couple of your projects, you chose to have openings and windows that at least had some component of like a rounded edge to it, or like a semicircle component
Yes.
to it. I wanted to know if that was as a result of a preference or kind of being partial to that look, or is there some sort of kind of greater design as a part of your language as like living and working architects?
I think deep profiles is something that we talked about. Sometimes it operates at the level of aperture that you're talking about, which how can you create space within an opening? So that desire of working with an outline, but at the same time creating space at the same time is a desire that we always have. I mean, we've had. Maybe it goes away, but right now we still have it. But that's a scale of aperture and windows. But you can also trace the same kind of logic within the kind of depth of our space. That's what we were calling spaces with deep profile, like a barrel vault that suddenly intersects with something. Again, you see an outline. That's why we call it profile. Sometimes the outline is a cut. Sometimes the outline is a silhouette of something. But how you can think about depth within that outline is a big part of, I think, architecture.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering about all of your graphics are in black and white, and I think I'm curious if that comes from just part of, you talked about depth in the beginning and kind of the simplicity of the geometry and how that's really integral to your process. I'm curious about how, like, why do you use black and white?
Well, it's an aesthetic choice to some extent.
But it goes back to what exactly you're talking, what you're
have something. Yeah.
No, it's just, for example, the fading crease. That's something that if you had two colors on the two faces, you wouldn't see that subtlety in geometry. So essentially, it started from that.
Yes.
And yes.
But at the same time, and it's something that I think we also carry in the way we teach as well. And I think it's something, if something doesn't look good in black and white, it wouldn't look good in color either. And I had an instructor that once used to say, his name was Pierre Belanger, was my mentor, and he used to say, color is a privilege. And that kind of stuck with me, but then I feel like black and white is not as forgiving as color.
But to be fair to the to the point that you made, when it's an aesthetic choice, it's hard to argue for what it does. most of the time. I still think there is something about the geometry that is, you don't need color, or sometimes color becomes distracting. But also there is something about the history of use of color. Actually, right now we are, there was a moment that there was something nice about black and white, and now actually color is quite present in a lot of contemporary practices, and it's quite exciting the way they explore it. And we are just resisting, and we are kind of making it more and more grim and shabby. And that it's sometimes you have to just stick to the things that you like, and you just find the extreme in the other direction. So now we are adding noise and texture and all of that, and more contrast. But there is, that question of color has changed. But when we teach, there is something about black and white. So vector drawings are different. There is something about minimum means of expression that is about architectural orthographic drawings. And I think that's a learning skills that is very important. The moment people start to explain space and depth through color and shade, they're missing that. They're missing the learning part of that ability, which through 3-line weights, how can you express, a work of geometry? That's a learning thing. And when you teach, you have to know that.
When I saw the pictures, I thought we were seeing the future, like 10, 20 years later, looks like that. So
Yeah.
beautiful. My question was, I'm like my project is making like a series of arch as a ceiling. And I'm heavily relying on the rhino, and then I don't see it's beautiful. What do I do next?
It's not beautiful, or it's beautiful?
It's not.
It's not beautiful. Okay.
I don't know. Like a president, I saw a lot of president, it's working well, but in Rhino, my model, it's not. So
Have you made a physical model of it?
which material should I use for this? sketch?
Just museum board.
Okay.
It would look better. White museum.
Wait. Thank you.
No. Yeah.
Hi, I'm actually from Lima, Peru. So
Oh.
I found very interesting your project about the architecture intervention around the archaeological sites.
Yeah.
Because I know that currently the archaeological sites, which are many around the city, are forgotten and not well taken care of. So, and I know that in Pachacamac, there's a lot of informal housing, and sort of like it's an architecture-less place. So I was wondering, what were some of the challenges that you faced when coming up with the idea of this intervention, especially within a site that there's nothing, it's desert, it's just a desert, and there's a lot of informal, it's like, I wouldn't say there's architecture or anything, but the nature to come up with something.
I mean, when you're, I don't want to say we're not. So the competition briefs usually gives you certain things. First of all, I didn't know that because the competition brief, our understanding was like it actually, they're very respectful of the archaeological sites. We couldn't cut at all near around the site. The only thing we were allowed to then expose it. At some point we were thinking about exposing, excavating and exposing, but we couldn't even do that. And I think we were having this discussion today, and I was on the jury for a competition, and I was looking at these projects, and it was like cottages, and I said I don't want to do cottages because there's not enough tension. Infill houses or houses that we build in the urban context has enough tension. And I think the beauty of this particular site was that it was the amount of pressure that was on it from the all the rules that was imposed upon it by the archaeological site and the historic context around it, that gave us just this almost equivalent of a Toronto lot to work with, which is our forte. So I think that was partially how we kind of dealt with the site. It was a series of Toronto lots.
But to your point, there was the architecture of the informal settlements around the site was quite rich. There was something about the use of terracotta blocks, and so we don't have an image of anything, but so no. But basically, we try. So these, these thresholds were the ones that there was also a series of programs that we were asked, usually buildings for the community, like kindergarten, things like daycare or small things. And we basically, we use the exact same tectonic, and even the way we are just placing a series of same scale objects within that threshold. So essentially, if you later on go and look at our website, you will see we just took that language and some of our formal desires, but then some of those buildings, we placed it back onto that threshold between the protected territory and the settlement. So we really liked it. We should have won.
I think so too. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So I had a question about the kind of what you mentioned in your presentation about how geometry has the power to connect two strangers or buildings together, like the Bauhaus and the project in Lithuania. My question is, how do you balance that with trying to find a connection to the specific place itself? Or do you find that geometry has the ability to do both, to connect to buildings maybe halfway across the world, but also to the specific site you're on?
There is a beautiful friction between the two, and we like to both of them to be alive. So generally, when we were talking about those set of projects that were on the threshold of the city and architecture, there's always, like, if you think about buildings, especially on urban context, there's always an existing typology. There's a way of servicing the building from the back or entering from the front. So there are already forces that are operating against the autonomy of a formal desire. And to not having the formal desire, you accommodate the program almost in an easier way. But to have the formal desire, it produces interesting tensions that sometimes is quite rich, and sometimes it doesn't happen on all levels. Usually the ground belongs to what you're talking about, which is the reality of the city, the program or access or servicing. The farther you get off the ground, usually the question of geometry becomes more present, and you can balance the two. So it's sometimes it's a sectional question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I want to know, how is your perspective on the limitation of space that most of your projects deal with? How has that evolved since you began your practice? Like, it seems like most of your projects, you're forced to deal with such limited space, which we might see as restricting, but I assume you guys see that as an opportunity. How has that evolved from when you started your practice to now? Where like now you've developed much more, I assume, much more creative solutions for limited spaces. Was that a huge struggle in the beginning of your practice? Yeah.
First projects that we did were like, I think our projects evolved, yes. But I think it's regardless of the okay. So, but it has evolved, our projects. Even I think we became more expressive with our geometry. The very first project that we did it in Midtown, which we'll never do it again. But if we basically, that's we sold our apartment and we invested in a project in Midtown. It was, if you look at it, it's very different from what we did. It's still same constraint. There is still our interest in geometry. It was called the offset house. It was like there was a bedroom that was almost hanging in the middle of the space. And it was a tight site, so much so that we had to, like, the excavation had become a thing, and we were maintaining 2 walls. It was a whole thing. And then I think we did another project that was similar to that. And after that, we started to move towards more the expression of geometry, while we were very, very, very aware of the spatial qualities of the spaces that we were creating, particularly given the size of the lots. As you saw, many of the projects was trying to provide indoor, open but indoor balconies for the projects, or sunken courtyards for light. But then I think we became more expressive with those.
That's true. And it's also, the last project that Behnaz showed, that's a very, extremes are interesting in architecture. That's a very, flat and wide, area to work with. And we kind of, and the thickness of it's a very thick roof that we kind of brought it very low. So sometimes it's narrow in plan, sometimes it's narrow as an elevation. So we like to find, there is something about architecture that the prompt should already be interesting. And we realize the moment there are certain dimensions that the extreme tightness is already an interesting problem. The similarity, the rhythm, you're already there. And the fact that is in part of the neighborhood that we work with, there is not a very precious Victorian neighborhood of Toronto either. So you can be slightly off. Sometimes you follow, like you have a kind of rich ingredients to work with. And the fact that experience, and there is something about, and this is not your question, but there is something about architecture is a very interesting discipline, but for some reason, our experience in the city is always richer than architecture itself. And we realize if we can create many projects in one neighborhood, people would see our buildings in a different thing. As part of the experience of the city, you would see 5 projects. We always thought of that as a project, not one big building, but a series of small buildings that all deal with one theme, and you will explore them in an hour walk while you see also people and buildings.
Thank you.
We are good at it. We are good at editing.
So thank you very much for the presentation. It was very insightful. There's been a lot of talk about the form, and I was wondering from sort of like a construction point of view, working with these forms, do you feel like your choice of material becomes a bit limited, or do you feel like it forces you in a certain direction in terms of, again, materiality?
And the second option.
So thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to ask, so we can clearly see that the relationship between your projects and the tension that they have with this site. But then at the same time, the geometry and the language that they have, it kind of seems like a dictionary of words that you can maybe put together and make a sentence with it. I was just wondering if you've ever tried putting some of these objects of architecture together to see if you can make like a composition of all these forms together, maybe even for fun, just to see how it looks like.
Our office is becoming like that. Just they're forced to be next to each other. Even both this, architecture characters and how they sit together. There is something about it. Whether you've authored all of them or you just did one carefully with some kind of like even the first image that we have of the whole project, sometimes we realize when we do them, when you place them side by side, it's almost curating your own work in a forceful way, helps you realize that some of the some of those relationship that pieces have. So even these They're different, even modes of representation, but somehow you realize, because one is a plan oblique, one is an elevation, and sometimes they start to go from, they have a relationship together, both within our body of work and our building with other buildings. And we didn't pick this question. We're going to answer both. Can you, just one thing, there are two things about materiality. One is about, I mean, there are many things about materiality, but the one that we care more is about modes of construction so far. There's also, you know, the choice of copper and all of those things. It matters a lot, but the real tension happens within the wall and then it expresses itself. And so that's why we went into the wall and we realized the interesting thing is there. Oh, really? Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to go and see. Thank you so much.
On behalf of the student body and faculty and staff community of the Department of Architectural Science, we would like to thank you both for sharing your work with us. Your words this evening has left us with a greater understanding of architecture and of how architects can advocate for better architecture and how we can be driving forces in changing the design world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Before you leave, just a couple of quick announcements. First, we should also thank everybody who helped make this possible. Sometimes it's really hard to see how much work was going on, but the Department of Architecture staff, Bridget De Lima, Alan Sereno, and Yujin Shi helped a lot. And our technicians, especially today, setting this up, Ivan Skyba and Leo Reutman helped out. One last thing, next week, it's actually really quick. We're having a lot of lectures this month. Literally next week, Thursday, same time, same place. Please join us because there's an architect coming from the Netherlands. I'm not going to try to say his name because I'll probably get it wrong, but the office is called Elephant Architecture, so you cannot forget it. Please join us. He's going to have a very interesting talk, hopefully as good as the one we had this evening. So thank you again on behalf of the Department of Architectural Science, and I hope to see you all next week. Thank you very much.